Morning. It's good to be together and worship today. If you are new with us, we are continuing a sermon series called Man Up. And yes, the sermon series is actually a series for men, but it is something that I hope will bless all of the women that are here as well. And in this series, we have looked at what it means to be a godly leader, son, brother, and husband. And today we're going to look at what it means to be a godly father. And as we get into that, we're going to, I want us to consider our Heavenly Father. And I want us to consider the fact that our Heavenly Father is an intentional Father. He is an intentional Father. You think back all the way to the Garden of Eden, even before that. From the beginning of time, God knew what would happen in our world. He knew what would happen in creating His children, Adam and Eve. He knew that as He created them, that they too would choose to do what Satan did, which was to follow their own way instead of His way, to want to become their own God instead of worship the one true God. And as a result of that, they sinned, they disobeyed, they fell away. And God, from the beginning of time, had a purpose. He had a plan. And that was a plan of redemption. I want us to think back. Today is celebration of Palm Sunday. And all the way back before God ever even created us, He had that day in mind. He had the day in mind when Christ would enter into Jerusalem, when He would begin to point His eyes towards the cross so that He could take our sin upon Himself, and we could be set back in relationship with God. We could be His friends again, be in relationship with Him again, just as had taken place in the Garden of Eden. That this day that we celebrate today, Palm Sunday, it did not happen by haphazard coincidence. It wasn't through happenstance that Jesus stumbled upon that moment. It was a plan that was set in place from the beginning of time. Our God, our Father, is an intentional Father. And I think for a lot of us as men, we want to be intentional men. We want to be intentional guys. And I think in many things we are. I think back in our own life, for Ruth and I, a number of years ago, we chose to build a house up in Granite. Talked about this a little bit ago. And in the process of building that house, did it with the help of many of you, with the help of my brother and my dad and a lot of other friends. But one of the first things that we did was to lay a blueprint, or to create a blueprint. We developed plans. So I think I have a picture of that here. So we did it on graph paper. So this is the plan of our house. Now that one little sheet of paper took us probably, a couple hundred hours to create, because there was drawing, and then there was erasing, and there was more drawing, and more erasing, and so on and so forth. And we finally got a blueprint. We finally got a plan for our house. And after we had that plan, I was able to go out and hire contractors to do things that I couldn't do. And then we began building. And my brother and I, we framed the house. And my dad came in and helped with the electric. And then we put down the floors, and we put in the windows, and we put on the siding, and put up the trim and the cabinets, and so on and so forth. And finally, we got into our house. We got into kind of the finished the finished product. We finally got there. It didn't happen through happenstance. It wasn't a coincidence that we ended up there. It was an intentional plan that had been begun 18 months earlier. I was talking to another friend this week, and he was talking about hunting a moose. Actually, Richard Blanchett. Some of you know this story. Richard had the desire to go to hunt a moose, and so he put in for the Maine lottery. And he put in for both he and his wife actually was the one who won the lottery. And but he could hunt with her on that permit. And so he went out, they went up to northern Maine, found an area, scouted it out. Then he got his moose call. He told me he practiced at home, and I would have loved to have heard it, Richard. He practiced at home for hours on end, perfecting his moose call. And then he and his wife finally went up to northern Maine, went out into the woods, used this moose call, called in his bull moose, and ended up with a moose. That did not happen accidentally. coincidentally. There was a plan that he put into place months earlier to get to that place where he got his moose. Ladies, I hope you're not offended by that picture. Men, you're probably loving it. Anyways, here's the deal. We are so, as men, we are intentional in so many things. We're intentional in so many things. But I believe sometimes we lack intentionality in some of the things that matter most, specifically in the raising of our children. There's a tremendous amount of statistics out there that talk about the fatherless epidemic in our nation. 40% of kids grow up with the fathers not in the home. And before we continue, I want to say this. If you are a single mom here today, if you're raising your kids either as a single mom or maybe you're raising your kids and your husbands are not the spiritual leaders of your home, you are, and you're bringing them to church every week, I just want to tell you, we applaud you, moms. You are doing a fantastic job raising kids. So well done. Way to go. And dads, or men here that have grown kids, kids who are out of the house, kids who, maybe you have grandkids or grown kids and you're thinking, man, my job is done. Your job is not done. Because your grown kids need you, your grandkids need you, and many of the kids in this church need spiritual fathers to come alongside of them and lead them and encourage them. So this message today is for you as well. Of the 60% of kids who have fathers that are still in the home, many of them are distant or emotionally absent from their kids. In terms of what's going on spiritually, in terms of spiritual intentionality, statistics say that 62% of the adults that come to church on a Sunday morning across our nation are women. What that means is only a third of the adult population in churches across our nation are men. In many ways, men have abdicated their spiritual responsibility at home. And men, as fathers, we've got some work to do. We've got some work to do. And if at this point in the sermon you're feeling guilty or you're feeling a little bit ashamed, that is not my intent this morning. My intent is not for us to feel guilty. My intent is to say it is time to get off of the sidelines and to get in the game and to do what God has called us to do, to be the primary leaders in our home and the primary fathers of our children in terms of leading them spiritually. Here's the good news, guys. Here's the good news. When kids talk about the greatest influence in their lives, 45% of young people say that it's their parents. 32% say that they look to friends. 15% say to celebrities, but we still win out. In his book, 10 Commitments for Dads, Josh McDowell, he says this. He says, until your child reaches 25 years of age, the greatest influence on his or her behavior will be the loving, close relationship with you, the father. Dads, our kids desperately need us. They need intentional fathers who will love and lead them. As men, we say, well, that's great. But how do we do it? How do we do it? The good news is God didn't leave us as orphans in this. He gave us a blueprint. He described exactly how we can do this as fathers. And it's found, there's multiple passages of scriptures where God talks about being a godly father, but there's one passage that's succinct and really gives us, I think, the tools that we need to be the father that God has called us to be, and that's in Ephesians 6:4. So if you would turn there, if you'd open your Bibles, and I would encourage you, too, to grab your sermon outline. And men, I know we don't like to do this, okay, but I want you to take notes, okay? Notes, N-O-T-E-S. It's probably a word that you've not heard for a long time. Take notes this morning. Write stuff down. I think there are things that you're going to learn and appreciate as we go through this passage. So in Ephesians 6:4, the Apostle Paul, he says this. He says, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. I don't even know how many words are in that, maybe 15? But man, they are 15 rich words. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And we're going to walk through this passage piece by piece this morning and take a look at it. So the first thing that we need to note is this. It says fathers. This is written to men. This is written to fathers. Last week, Dan talked about the place of fathers in the home. He talked about headship, and that's kind of a term that we don't necessarily love to talk about. But he said, God has called men, just as Christ is called to be the head of the church, God has called men to be the head of their families, to be the head of their wives. And that's not in an authoritarian or controlling way. It's in a self-sacrificial, laying down of our lives sort of way, in a servant-oriented way. And that's to extend from a relationship with, he actually likened that to dancing, if you remember. He said, when you're in a dance, and Ruth and I would be in the same category, at least I would be in the same category as what Dan talked about. Like, I cannot dance. But anyways, and Ruth can tell you this, in a dance, you have to have a lead. Someone has to lead in dancing, or else there's total chaos. I mean, there's chaos in our dancing anyways, but it would be really chaotic if there wasn't a lead. And Dan said it's true for the family as well. There has to be a lead. And that extends from our relationship with our spouses to our children. We are called to be, by God's order of design, the primary leaders in our home, the primary spiritual leaders in our home. Now, moms, this doesn't mean that you can tune this out. This passage has the same truth and applies to you as well. But the first calling is for dads to lead in the instruction and discipline of their kids and not to lead them towards anger. So what are some of the tools that God gives us in this passage? First tool is this. He says, fathers, and then he says, do not provoke your children to anger. Do not provoke your children to anger. The NIV says, do not exasperate your children. Paul expands on this idea in Colossians 3, where he says this. He says, fathers, don't provoke your children to anger, lest they become discouraged. Eugene Peterson, in The Message, he paraphrases that text by saying, parents, don't come down too hard on your children, or you'll crush their spirits. There are a number of ways that we can crush the spirits of our kids. And we're going to continue, as we continue this morning, I want us to use continue with this building analogy. So this first thing that he says is, do not lead your kids towards anger. So if we're not going to lead our kids towards anger, there are things that we need to cut away from our life to keep us from doing that. So I think a saw is a good illustration of that, right? When you use a saw, you're cutting things away. I mean, you're cutting a 2x4 or whatever, and you're cutting off the scraps so that you can use what is left. So this morning, I want us to talk for a couple of minutes about things that we need to cut away from our lives in order to build effectively into the life of our kids. The first thing is this, men. We need to cut away unrealistic expectations. We need to cut away the unrealistic expectations that we have for our kids. Because here's the deal. Our kids are just that. They're kids. They're children. And a lot of times, I don't know about you, but I want them to be mini adults. Our toddlers, our children, our adolescents, our young adults, they're not adults yet. They're children. But a lot of times, we want them to act that way. When our kids are silly, or they spill milk at the dinner table, or they make a foolish choice, or they drag mud through the house, or maybe they set our little vacuum cleaner for 2 in the morning, which happened in our house the other day and woke me up. We get frustrated, and we yell, and we kind of act out, and we say, in effect, don't you know any better? But they don't know any better, because they're kids. And yet sometimes we want them to act like adults. Perpetual fault-finding can crush a kid. Can crush a child. Second thing that can crush a child is legalism, the idea of excessive rules, or license, the idea of no rules. These are two unhealthy extremes that we tend to have as fathers. Some of us, we tend towards legalism where we have a rule for everything, and the answer is always no. Our kids can't move without having us on them, being scolded. Or, and that can lead towards kids being angry with us. Or we can lean towards this area of license. where kids just have free reign to do whatever they want to do. We have no rules, no expectations, no boundaries. And that, too, can lead our kids towards anger. In fact, Tim Kimmel, who wrote a book called Grace-Based Parenting, he says this. He says, rules without relationship leads to rebellion. That's the legalism part of it. Relationship without rules leads to resentment. That's the license part of it. Number 3, harsh words can crush a child. I'm not saying that you're never going to raise your voice, but if we have a habit of yelling or a habit of being angry with our kids, we will crush our children. 4th thing is this. We have the desire sometimes to create a mini-me. We want to create our kid, we want our kid to be just like us. We want them to play the same sports that we played. Or if they want to do an activity that we didn't do growing up, we say, oh, we don't want you to do that. We're trying to form fit them to be just like us. But God didn't create them to be just like us. He created them as individual people made in His image. And we need to foster that within our kids. Otherwise, we will crush their spirit. Another way that we can crush the hearts of our kids is by having a critical spirit of them. And acting in such a way that they never believe that they're enough in our eyes. They can never measure up. In preparation for this sermon, I was really asking myself, man, where do I crush the hearts of my kids? And I think it's in that last area. I tend to have very high expectations for myself. I tend to have very high expectations of others. I have high expectations for my kids. And I can remember talking with my small group of guys recently that I meet with every week and saying to them, I was talking about basketball, and Noah played basketball this last year, and I said, after the game, sometimes I find myself saying to him, Noah, you did a great job here, here, and here, but. I tell you, that but statement just crushes kids. You did a great job, but you didn't measure up in my eyes here. And I really had to, I didn't have to check myself. These guys just came down and nailed me and said, what are you doing? You can't do that. And they checked me, which was so good, so helpful. Ephesians 4:29, it says this. It says, don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. Do not crush their spirits. What do you need to cut away? What do you need to cut away in order to do that? Next, Paul says to bring them up. To bring them up. And this is the tool of relationship. At every work site, there is Dunkin' Donuts coffee, right? I mean, what work site does not have a good cup of coffee? And it is at the coffee break that relationship is built, right? You put down the hammer, you put down the work belt, you get out the cup of coffee, and you sit around with the guys and you talk. Some of us need to learn to have coffee breaks with our kids. We need to learn to build relationship with our children. This passage, or this term, bring them up, is the same Greek word that Paul uses for the word nourish and cherish. Just a few verses earlier, he says this, at the end of Ephesians 5, he says, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church. That's the same word, same Greek word for bring them up. We're to nourish and cherish and build into the life of our kids. In a moment, we're going to talk about disciplining them and instructing them. But if we try to discipline and instruct them without having that wrapped in this relationship of nourishment and cherishing them, we will create this angry, embittered spirit within them. We need to have the same type of father, or be the same type of father with our children that God the Father is with us. I've talked to a lot of people who on their spiritual journey, they've changed the way that they view God. And they've changed the way that they view God when they've come to understand His great love for them. When they've come to understand the relationship that He desires with them. A relationship full of grace and approval and acceptance and forgiveness and love. when all they knew of God was his discipline or his rules, his instruction, many of them felt either crushed by God or angry with God. But when they came to understand his rules and his discipline wrapped in the context of his loving relationship with them, that built in them an ability to trust, a desire to be loyal to their Heavenly Father, not living as if they had to be afraid or living in anger or living in shame, but living with a trusting, loyal relationship with their Father. Do your sons and daughters, do they feel nourished by you? Do they feel cherished by you? Extend God's love. Extend his attributes of grace and mercy and forgiveness and care into the hearts of your kids. Spend time with them. Get a coffee break with them. Build into them in that way. Next, the Apostle Paul says, bring them up in the discipline of the Lord. In the discipline of the Lord. And this is the tool of correction. And I think a great analogy of that is a crowbar. You think of a crowbar, and, as I said, we built our house, and you don't use a crowbar to beat a 2x4 to move it. You use a crowbar to pry the nails out so that you can adjust it to where it needs to be. And that's the same with discipline. Discipline is never to be something that is damaging. It's to be redemptive. Discipline is not intended to be a destructive tool. It's to be a corrective tool. Hebrews 12, it says this. It says they, and he's talking about parents here, they disciplined us for a little while, so as they thought best. But God disciplines us for our good, in order that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. God's discipline in our lives is to form us into his character. It's to guide us towards holiness. He has this intentional goal in mind that he is leading us towards in his discipline. The discipline that we give our children should be the same way. It should always be redemptive. It should have purpose behind it and not be destructive. I think oftentimes we struggle with this. I know I struggle with this. Because usually we lean on one or two sides. It's that thing of license or that thing of legalism. It's this struggle that we have to be either overly lenient or overly harsh. Sometimes when we're overly lenient, we act, we choose not to act. We never discipline. We just kind of let things go. In the passage in Hebrews, it says that discipline is painful, and I think sometimes it's more painful for the parent than it is for the kid, right? It's painful for the parent because they don't want to be the bad guy. It's painful for the parent because it means it takes work, it takes intentionality, it takes time. And we don't want to put those things in, so it's easier to just kind of let it go and say, I won't discipline. Because it takes work. And it's hard. But when we do that, we miss opportunities to guide our children. We miss opportunities to correct them. E.K. Simpson, this is a guy who wrote a commentary a long time ago during World War II era, and the wording is a little bit challenging, but I think it's a great example of this. He says this, and you got to imagine this in an English accent. Ruth said not to do it for you, so I'm not going to do it for you. But he says this. He says, too many parents nowadays foster the latent mischief by a policy of laissez-faire. In other words, anything goes. Pampering their pert urchins, their kids, like pet monkeys, whose escapades furnish a fund of amusements as irresponsible freaks of no serious import. Such unbridled young scamps. I'd love to hear that in an English. Such unbridled young scamps. For lack of correction, develop too often into headstrong, peevish, self-seeking characters, menaces to the community they dwell, and the blame rests with their supine and duty-shirking seniors. It rests with us as parents. I mean, boy, that is strong. right? But men, when we choose not to discipline, or when we pawn it off on someone else, we shirk the God-given responsibility that He has given us to guide our children, to lead them towards correction in a healthy way. The other extreme that we fall on is we can be overly harsh with our discipline. And I think this happens when, as parents, as men especially, we just get frustrated, and so we react. You know, we get frustrated because of something that they did, and we just react to them instead of acting with discipline. We choose to react. Alistair Begg, he's the senior pastor of Parkside Church in Cleveland, Ohio. He says, fathers should never discipline in these three instances: when they're annoyed, when they've had their pride hurt or injured, and when they've lost their temper. And some of us are saying, man, that's the only time I discipline, you know? But it's when we're annoyed, when our pride has been injured, and when we've lost our temper, that we react with frustration instead of acting with discipline. Our discipline is always to be redemptive. It's always to lead to change. We need to have a plan. We need to follow through with it. I'll tell you, I often blow it in my discipline. I often react out of frustration. That's my bent. But I feel like God, a couple of weeks ago, gave me a really neat opportunity to actually discipline my child accordingly. There was a situation in our house. One of our kids lied. I'm not going to tell you who. Don't ask them, okay? I had to beg them to be able to tell a story. But anyways, one of our kids lied, and came down and I said, okay, you lied to me. I said, you need to go to our discipline, this little discipline chart we made a while ago. Go to our discipline chart, and you need to tell me what happens when you lie. And normally in that instance, I would get frustrated, I would get angry, I'd say things that I shouldn't, I'd yell, whatever. But I was calm for a moment. And I asked them to look and look on the discipline chart, and they came back and they said, well, we lose 2 days of screen time, and we get a spanking. Well, now our kids are getting older. This was a discipline chart written a long time ago. And so I said to him, I said, okay, well, I said, you're going to lose 2 days of screen time. And I said, you can either get a spanking, or you can write me a paragraph about why lying is wrong. And I'm saying, please, Lord, make them write the paragraph, not the spanking, okay? So anyways, they said, we'll take the paragraph. And I'm like, phew. So they took the paragraph, and this is what they wrote. This is the note. You should not lie because you will get in trouble. I should not lie because it upsets you and me. We should not lie because people don't trust you anymore. When you lie, you can lose privileges. When you lie, you can't get out of it. And no excuses, or you will get in more trouble. You think there was a little bit of learning in that? You know, it gave us the opportunity to talk further about the fact that lying breaks relationship. The reason God hates lying is because it breaks our relationship with Him and with one another. And I tell you, God opened up a great opportunity to speak redemptively into the life of my kid. Finally, fathers, the Apostle Paul says this. He says, we are to bring our children up not only in the discipline of the Lord, but in the instruction of the Lord. While discipline has to do with what we do, instruction has more to do with what we say to them. And I think a great analogy of this is a level. You know, when you're building a house, you have to have a level because a level keeps things plumb. A level keeps things square and straight and level and balanced. And you have to have that as you're building your home or whatever you're choosing to build. And it's the same way for our kids. They need something to keep them plumb. Keep the plumb line in their life. To keep them directed. To keep them led. And that's our instruction. And it's our instruction and discipline in the Lord. Guys, whether you realize it or not, your kids are being instructed every single day. They're being instructed by the internet. They're being instructed by their teachers. They're being instructed by their peers. They're being instructed by the media. They are being instructed every single day. And some of us are saying, well, you know what? I let my wife instruct them. Or I send them to church to be instructed. And that's great that you do those things. But it is our primary responsibility to instruct our children in the ways of the Lord. And so, men, I would encourage you in this. It's our responsibility to lead in going to church. Every Sunday morning. Hey, it's Sunday. It's time to get up. It's God's day. We're going to worship today. We're not going to stay in bed. We're not going to do our favorite hobby. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to go and worship. And then if we want to do our favorite hobby, we're going to do that. Man, guys, if you lead in that in your homes, your wife, your children will be blown away. And they will be encouraged. Secondly, men, to lead in family devotions. To gather your kids around the table and say, you know what? We're going to open God's Word. And we're going to see what it has to say today. And I know that may feel a little bit out of place for some of us. It may be a little bit challenging. But just start. Start in the Psalms. Start in one of the Gospels. Lead your men, or lead your children in family in devotions. Teach them about what it means to be a boy of biblical character. A girl of godly value. You know, bring God into every situation that they face. You know, ask them, what would Jesus do? How would he handle this situation? Teach our boys about biblical sexuality. You know, talk to your boys about the fact that true men honor women. True men wait to have sex until they're in a committed relationship called marriage. That's what real men do. Teach your boys that. Teach your women or your girls about biblical identity. That their identity is not bound up in what other people have to say about them. It's bound up in what Jesus Christ has to say about them. And they don't have to give themselves away to some guy to feel valued. They can be valued because God says they're valuable. Teach them that. They need to hear it from you, dads. They need to hear it from us as fathers. Teach them about biblical identity. That God, or about a worldview, that God says that there is a worldview. His worldview is truth. And help them decipher that from what the world has to say. Pray for them. Believe that God is actively working in their lives as you pray for them. And pray for yourself as well in that process. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline in the instruction of the Lord. Fathers, God's calling for us is to be intentional with our kids. As I said earlier, man, we can be intentional in so many things. But he's calling us to be more intentional with the raising of our kids than we would be in the drawing of the plans for our house, or hunting a moose, or rising, in the corporate ladder, or our workplace, or being the best in our hobby. He's calling us to be more intentional in the raising of our kids, or our grandkids, or being spiritual father to kids in this church than to any of those other things. He calls us to be intentional. In the back of your bulletin, there are 2 books. One's called Visionary Parenting, or the back of the sermon outline. One called Visionary Parenting, the other's called 10 Commitments for Dads. We have them out at the Resource Center, and I would encourage you, dads, to consider picking one up. They're short reads, because men, we don't like long reads. So pick one up. Order one today, and we'll have it here for you next week. At the outset of this whole sermon series, Dan read for us Ephesians 2:10. And he said this, he said, "For we are God's workmanship." This is what the Apostle Paul says. "We are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." Men, God has called you to a purpose. He has called you to be biblical leaders and sons and husbands and fathers. And some of us are saying, man, but I don't know how to do that. I can't do that on my own. And you know what? You're right. You can't do it on your own. We need Christ to help us with this. And that's why 2,000 years ago, he rode into Jerusalem on a donkey as a servant, knowing that he was headed to the cross to take our sin upon himself, all the stuff that we can't do, all the stuff that we fail in, to take that on himself, to set us right with God the Father, and then to fill us with the Holy Spirit, giving us the ability to be the men that he has called us to be.